Go ahead and reach for those cuffs, officer. Everything from this moment forward is being recorded. He said it quietly, the way a man speaks when he has already decided how everything is going to end. Not as a warning, not as a plea, but as a simple statement of fact, the kind that lands without drama, precisely because it needs none. Wade Pruitt did not hear him, or he heard him and chose not to, which amounts to the same thing when you are a man who has spent 11 years deciding that the rules of consequence apply to other people. What happened next in a coffee shop on Maple Street in the back of a patrol car, rolling through manicured October streets in a conference room, 39 floors above a city that was not Hargrove, and never would be. Cost one suburb, its reputation, 2 men, their freedom, and every taxpayer in Caldwell County, something they would feel in their wallets every April for the next 6 years. It cost a police department its leadership, a city attorney, his composure, and a political smile, its last remaining connection to anything behind it. But this is not simply a story about a bad cop. Bad cops exist everywhere, and their stories, as painful as they are, follow a familiar arc. This is a story about something more specific and more dangerous about what happens when arrogance walks into a room that has already been quietly, carefully, and completely prepared for it. Which state do you live in? And in your town, does the badge protect the people or does it protect itself? Special Agent Damon Briggs had done things in his 23 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation that most people would not believe if he told them, which is why he almost never told anyone. He had dismantled a labor trafficking network operating out of 3 Memphis warehouses using nothing but a single informant, a prepaid phone bought at a gas station off I-40 and 72 consecutive hours without sleep, the last 18 of which he had spent in a surveillance van eating cold rice from a takeout container and waiting for a phone call that he had calculated with the precision of a man who does not guess would come at 3:14 in the morning. It came at 3:16. He had walked into a Philadelphia police precinct on a Thursday afternoon with his badge open and arrested the deputy commissioner in front of his assembled evening squad without raising his voice once, without drawing his weapon, and without a single officer in that room moving to intervene, because something in the way he entered and the way he spoke communicated with perfect clarity that intervention was not a viable option. He had testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee 3 times under questioning specifically engineered by people who were very good at their jobs to break him, and he had never in any of those 3 sessions lost his composure by so much as a fraction. Today what he needed, what he wanted with an urgency that was almost embarrassing given the usual weight of his concerns, was a decent cup of coffee. He pulled the black government-issue Suburban to the curb on Maple Street at 8:47 in the morning, and cut the engine and threw the windshield. Hargrove looked exactly as it always looked when he passed through on his way to somewhere else. Deliberate, precise, aggressively pleasant, in the manner of a place that has decided prosperity is a form of virtue and arranged its flower beds accordingly. The maples lining the main street had just begun their October turn leaves going amber at the edges in the cool morning air, and there was a particular smell to the season that he had never been able to adequately describe to anyone who hadn't grown up with it. Cool and faintly sweet, and carrying underneath it something that felt like an ending conducted with good manners. He stepped out of the Suburban, adjusted the cuffs of his charcoal suit jacket, and took one slow breath. He was 51 years old, broad across the shoulders, with close-cropped salt and pepper hair, and the kind of face that had learned over 2 decades in federal law enforcement to reveal almost nothing about what was happening behind it. He moved with a quiet, unhurried authority that had nothing to do with performance, head-level eyes doing their automatic sweep of the street, the parked cars, the faces visible through shop windows, not because he was looking for trouble, but because after 23 years the habit had become as involuntary as breathing, something that happened whether or not he told it to. The cafe was called Forsyth and Sons, and it occupied the ground floor of a converted Victorian between an insurance office and a wine shop, which told you most of what you needed to know about Maple Street. The sign above the door was hand-lettered in dark green. Through the large front window, Edison bulbs glowed warm amber against the gray October sky and the interior. When he pushed open the glass door and the small bell chimed overhead, had the carefully constructed coziness that cost significant money to achieve reclaimed oak floors, exposed brick, a chalkboard menu in deliberately imperfect handwriting. Acoustic music played low enough to seem accidental. Before he ordered, before he paid and moved to the window table and crossed his legs and took the first sip of what turned out to be an excellent dark roast, he did one thing that he did every morning regardless of where he was and regardless of whether he expected to need it. He checked the Longines Weems watch on his left wrist. Not the time. He already knew the time. He checked it the way a surgeon checks an instrument, the way you verify something you depend on before you enter a room where depending on it matters. To anyone watching it was a vintage aviator's watch, brushed steel case, worn leather strap, the kind of thing a particular sort of careful, tasteful man might wear because he appreciated history and craft. The movement inside it, however, had been installed in a Quantico basement workshop by a technical division that did not appear on any organizational chart accessible to the public. It contained a microphone array sensitive enough to capture a whispered conversation from across a quiet room, a 48-hour battery, and an encrypted storage chip that had survived in controlled field tests 30 meters of water submersion. It had been standard issue for agents at Damon's clearance level since 2021. He activated it with 2 seconds of thumb pressure against the crystal face, felt the faint confirming vibration, and released it. He was not expecting to need it today. Today was a coffee meeting with County District Attorney Patricia Ellison, a productive conversation about a joint task force, a sealed indictment notification already glowing on his phone screen. He ordered his black coffee. His blueberry scone settled at the window table, read the message from his deputy director. Indictment sealed. Good work, Briggs, and allowed himself for exactly the length of a single sip, a small and private satisfaction. 16 months of work reduced to 1 sentence. Outside on Maple Street, through the large front window, a black and white patrol cruiser rolled slowly past, and Damon watched it the way he watched everything, without expression, without concern, cataloging it and moving on. He looked back at his phone. He picked up his scone. Officer Wade Pruitt had been awake since 5:10 that morning and angry since approximately 5:15, which was for him a completely ordinary Tuesday. The argument with Donna had started over the credit card statement, $290 at a tactical gear supplier listed in his own handwriting on the shared expense sheet as department equipment, which Donna had looked at for a long time before looking at him, and which he had explained in the tone of a man who finds explaining things beneath him, and which she had declined to believe. The argument had not ended. It had simply stopped, replaced by a silence that was somehow worse than any volume, the specific silence of 7 years of marriage being held just barely in place by the decision not to say the thing that would make it irreversible. He had been on patrol for 3 hours by the time he turned onto Maple Street. The gas station breakfast sandwich had been warm in the bag and cold by the time he unwrapped it at a red light on Garrison Avenue, and he had eaten it anyway because he was hungry and because the morning had already established its character. 2 noise complaints and 1 parking dispute. The parking dispute involving a man who had gone to considerable length to explain that he had only been double parked for 4 minutes, as though the number of minutes was the relevant issue. Wade had written the ticket without comment. This was Hargrove. This was always Hargrove, manicured and quiet and relentlessly correct, and some mornings that correctness made him feel not like a protector, but like a decoration, seasonal and ornamental and largely unnecessary. A man in a uniform parked in a suburb where nothing ever actually happened, and where the people who lived here preferred it that way, and thanked him for his service at the 4th of July block party, and then went back inside and forgot he existed. Wade Pruitt was 43 years old, 11 years with the Hargrove Police Department. Thick-necked and buzz-cut uniform, one size too tight across the shoulders, because he kept meaning to get a new one fitted and kept finding other things to do with his time. He had been the starting quarterback at Eastmore High School, and this remained, though he would never have described it this way, the central organizing fact of his self-understanding, which is a profoundly dangerous thing to be when the fact in question is 25 years in the past and the world has continued moving without particular regard for your previous accomplishments. He understood the world in terms of territory and belonging. Who was in their right place? Who was not? It was a taxonomy he had constructed early in his life, assembled from sources he had never examined and assumptions he had never questioned, and it had served him adequately in Hargrove, where almost everyone who came into his orbit fell where he expected them to fall. His personnel file, which he had never been given any reason to examine, told a story he would have disputed vigorously had anyone shown it to him directly. 16 excessive force complaints filed in 5 years, 13 of which involved Black or Latino men. All 16 reviewed and closed without finding by Sergeant Roy Barker, who was the current head of Hargrove PD's Internal Affairs Division and who had been Wade's roommate at the police academy and the best man at his wedding in the summer of 2010. No one at the department had ever found this arrangement worth examining. No one had ever tried. He turned onto Maple Street on autopilot elbow on the window frame radio, murmuring the low traffic of a quiet Tuesday morning. He glanced through the window of Forsyth and Sons as the cruiser rolled past the regulars, the laptop crowd, the yoga pants crowd, the retired couple he recognized by their matching gray jackets, and then at the window table a man he did not recognize. Tall, black, expensive suit, alone, watching the street. The response that moved through Wade Pruitt in the next 2 seconds was not a thought. It did not happen at the level of reasoning or deliberation. It was a pattern match, instantaneous and automatic, the product of a taxonomy built over decades and never revised, doesn't belong casing the place, waiting for something. The suit registered not as evidence of legitimacy, but as a contradiction that required explanation. In Wade's private map of the world, a black man in a 3-piece suit in this particular neighborhood on a Tuesday morning in October did not read as success or as professionalism or as any of the things that a suit is generally meant to communicate. It read as something that needed accounting for. He did not run the plates on the black Suburban at the curb, did not call it in, did not wait for any infraction to occur or any complaint to arrive. He parked the cruiser 2 storefronts down, adjusted his belt, and walked toward the door of Forsyth and Sons, and his hand had settled on his baton before he had taken 4 steps. The cafe went quiet in the particular way that spaces go quiet when something with the potential for violence enters them, not silent because the music kept playing, and the espresso machine completed its cycle with a hiss of steam that sounded almost apologetic, but conversation dropped 2 full registers, and the room's attention shifted invisible and unanimous toward the uniformed officer moving between the tables with the deliberate proprietary ease of a man who expects space to clear before him. Damon registered it from behind his phone screen without looking up. Heavy footsteps, the jingle of keys and equipment, the woman at the next table stopping mid-sentence in the manner of someone who has decided that whatever she was saying can wait. He told himself in the reasonable part of his mind that was still conducting its Tuesday morning, just a local cop doing his rounds, he'll move on. The footsteps stopped beside his table. The shadow of a large man fell across his phone screen. He waited 3 counts. Then he set the phone face down, uncrossed his legs, and looked up. Completely neutral, not hostile, not deferential, not apologetic. Just present and paying attention. "Can I help you?" Officer Wade stood over him with his thumbs hooked in his vest, using his bulk the way he always used it as an opening argument, a physical statement of hierarchy delivered before a word was spoken. "You live around here. Is there a problem?" "I asked you a question. Do you live in this neighborhood?" "I don't see how that's relevant," Damon said, his voice entirely even. "I'm a paying customer having a coffee." Wade reached for the standard tool, the one that had worked 100 times in 100 different situations. "We've had some complaints, reports of suspicious activity. Men matching your description loitering in businesses, making customers uncomfortable." Damon set his coffee cup down slowly, precisely, and let a moment breathe between them. "Matching my description," he said. Not a question. Just the words repeated at exactly the same volume dropped into the space between them, like something released from a height and allowed to fall. At the table to his left, a woman in a light jacket pressed her lips together hard, and the sound she suppressed was brief and involuntary, and told him that the room had understood the sentence, even if Wade had not. Wade's face flooded dark red from the collar upward, the blood rising fast, and the embarrassment hardened immediately into something more dangerous than embarrassment, the specific fury of a man who has been made to hear himself in public. "Stand up," Wade said. Damon did not stand. He leaned back slightly and interlaced his fingers on the table and used the voice he used in Senate hearing rooms, measured, precise, carrying without volume, the voice of a man who has never once needed to shout to be heard. He stated calmly and with the specificity of someone who has memorized the relevant statutes that he had not committed any crime, that he was waiting for a scheduled meeting, and that unless Wade could articulate a specific, reasonable suspicion that he was engaged in criminal activity, he intended to finish his coffee. He said nothing about who he was. He said nothing about his badge, his credentials, his 23 years. He said only what any citizen had the legal right to say. This was the fork in the road. A smarter officer, a cop who had spent 30 seconds reading the room, noticing the legal precision registering the complete and total absence of fear, would have recognized the edge and stepped back from it. Wade Pruitt was not that officer. He had been challenged in front of an audience and in his experience that ended one way. His hand dropped from his vest to the baton on his belt. "ID, now." Yolanda, behind the counter, went still, both palms flat on the cold surface, eyes locked on the table by the window, not moving, not speaking, her phone sitting 6 inches from her right hand. Damon stood 2 inches taller than Wade, rising with the solidity of something that had chosen to cooperate rather than been forced to a distinction he intended to be visible. He looked directly at the security camera mounted above the chalkboard menu. "I am complying with your physical direction," he said clearly for the room and for the lens. "I do not consent to this detention. I have done nothing wrong. You're resisting." Wade's voice went up the volume aimed at an imagined future report rather than the present moment. He shoved Damon forward against the window glass, which shuddered in its frame from the impact. Damon's coffee cup tipped, and the dark roast spread across the white table surface in a slow, deliberate advance, reaching the edge and dropping onto the herringbone floor tile in a thin, steady stream, quiet, unhurried, unstoppable. Damon's cheek was near the cold glass. His voice, when he spoke, was entirely level, the calmest thing in the room. "In the inside pocket of my jacket," he said, "there is a leather wallet. Before you complete this arrest, look at what is inside it." He said nothing more. He did not explain. He did not name what was there. He did not warn. The first cuff clicked shut around his left wrist. Wade reached into the inside pocket of the charcoal jacket and felt the leather immediately. Not a billfold, something categorically different, heavier and stiffer, the leather thick and well-conditioned in a way that had nothing to do with fashion. He pulled it out and flipped it open, and the gold shield caught the Edison light above the counter and threw it back hard, deeply engraved, substantial in the hand, bearing at the top the spread-winged eagle of the Department of Justice, and below it, pressed into the metal in raised blue enamel, with a precision achievable only by one organization in the country, the words Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent Damon Briggs. Wade stared at it. His brain processed the image, produced an output, and produced it again. Both outputs were the same fake, because the only alternative, was not a thing he was capable of sitting with. "Nice toy," he said too loud, the overcompensation of a man who has heard doubt in his own processing and is attempting to drown it out. He turned and tossed the badge wallet onto the coffee-soaked table, where it landed with a heavy definitive thud that went through the room like a struck bell. "Impersonating a federal officer. That's a felony. Now you're really in trouble." The gasp that moved through Forsyth and Sons was unanimous and quiet, not theatrical. Just real, the collective sound of people who have just watched a door close on something that cannot be undone. An elderly man near the door rose halfway from his chair. "Officer," he said carefully, the voice of someone choosing his words with great deliberation. "That looked real. Sit down." Damon closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. He did not allow himself anger. Anger was a resource he had spent 23 years learning to manage, to direct, to deploy only when deployment served a purpose. What he allowed himself in that single second, with his cheek against the cold glass of a coffee shop window in Hargrove, was one thought, and one thought only: Jalen. 16 years old. Broad across the shoulders the way his father had been at 16. Drove the used Civic to school 3 mornings a week through suburbs that looked exactly like this one, past patrol cars that looked exactly like this one, navigating a world that had decided without consulting him what he looked like from the outside. Damon had sat with Jalen the night he got his license and had the conversation, the one that no parent should ever have to give, that no parent in a particular demographic ever gets to skip. He had explained it carefully, and Jalen had listened carefully, and at the end Jalen had said, "I know." Dad, in the voice of a young man who had already figured it out on his own, and was only being told it officially, which was somehow the hardest version of it. Damon held that thought for the full second. Then he filed it away in the place where he kept things he would need later, and he opened his eyes. Wade pushed him toward the door. Damon said his badge number, said his supervisor's name, said nothing else. Behind the counter, Yolanda's phone was already up, and it had been up since the moment the badge wallet hit the table. The hood of the cruiser was cold through the charcoal fabric of Damon's jacket, and Wade's hands were rough and imprecise as he completed the pat-down on the sidewalk outside Forsyth and Sons. And the October air smelled of wet leaves and car exhaust and the particular sharpness of a morning that was not going to go the way anyone had planned it. The silver Volvo came around the corner faster than the residential limit and parked crookedly behind the cruiser with the slightly uneven urgency of someone who had made a phone call in the car and not entirely stopped thinking about it. District Attorney Patricia Ellison was 49 years old, 5'4", possessed of a temper. She had spent 2 decades learning to deploy strategically rather than reflexively, and normally very good at that. She got out without fully closing the door, which told Damon everything he needed to know about what the last 3 minutes had done to her composure. She took in the scene in 3 seconds, the handcuffs, the position, the badge wallet visible through the cafe window, resting on the coffee-soaked table like an accusation, and the strategic deployment failed completely. "Officer." She was already moving. "What on earth are you doing?" "Active arrest, ma'am." "Step back." She pulled her own credentials and held them 4 inches from Wade's face. "I am Patricia Ellison. I am the district attorney for this county. The man whose face is against your hood is the assistant special agent in charge of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, and we had a meeting scheduled in that cafe in 20 minutes. She looked at Damon. "Tell me I'm wrong." "You're not wrong, Patricia." His voice was composed, level, entirely without heat. "But don't uncuff me." She blinked. "I'm sorry. Don't uncuff me. We're going to the station. I want this arrest fully processed, every second of it on official record on camera." He looked at Wade. "Officer Pruitt, I believe you were taking me somewhere." Wade had the handcuff key half drawn from his ring. He stood frozen, key extended, no viable instruction available from any direction. His certainty developing structural problems faster than he could patch them. 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans turned onto Maple Street, simultaneously moving with the unhurried coordination that communicates far more than speed ever could. We are not in a hurry because we do not need to be. They parked in a loose arc around the cruiser, sealing the street exits without ceremony. 6 agents in tactical vests stepped out, the yellow FBI lettering on their jackets, bright against the gray morning sky. They did not draw weapons. They did not raise their voices. They took up positions with the calm efficiency of professionals who are very good at their jobs and who are at this particular moment personally offended on behalf of someone they respect. Senior Agent Carl Odom, gray-bearded, broad-shouldered, the face of a man who had made arrests in 4 countries and found all of them roughly equivalent in their essential nature, walked directly to Wade and stopped. I believe he said, his voice the texture of gravel being poured carefully from a considerable height, that you have my boss in handcuffs. I'm going to ask you to step away from him. Slowly, Wade stepped back. Both hands rose to chest height in the involuntary physics of a man who has just understood with sudden and complete clarity exactly where he is standing. Damon straightened from the hood of the cruiser. He rotated his shoulders, adjusted his jacket as well as the cuffs permitted, and looked at Patricia. "Ride with Agent Odom," he said. "I'll ride with Officer Pruitt." Then one final time to Wade. "Officer, I believe you were taking me somewhere." The back seat of Wade Pruitt's cruiser smelled of industrial disinfectant and something underneath it, something older and darker, the accumulated sediment of fear and anger and surrender that no cleaning product ever fully erased, no matter how often the vehicles were processed. The vinyl was cracked along the center seam, cold through the charcoal fabric, and the plexiglass divider between the seats was scratched and slightly yellowed, softening everything on the other side into shapes. Damon sat with his back straight and his feet flat on the floor. He was not thinking about the discomfort. He was thinking about Jalen again. The Civic, the 3 mornings a week, the suburbs that look exactly like this one, and he held that thought for as long as it served him. And then he pressed his thumb to the crystal face of the Longines Weems watch and felt the faint confirming vibration. 31 minutes of audio intact and saving. He put his thumb back in his lap. In the front seat, Wade's eyes went to the rearview mirror every 30 seconds, not watching his prisoner, but watching the convoy behind them, 3 black Suburbans locked onto his tail at exactly 2 car lengths, unhurried and patient. Somehow that patience was worse than aggression would have been. It communicated something that aggression never could. "We have nowhere else to be." "You're quiet back there," Wade said. His voice had thinned since the cafe. The swagger had gone the way cheap paint goes when the surface beneath it gets wet. Damon said nothing. "Listen, if there's been some kind of mix-up with the ID, maybe we can handle this quietly, if you want to explain yourself. Officer Pruitt." Damon did not turn his head. His voice was entirely conversational, which was significantly more unsettling than anger would have been. "Everything you say to me from this moment forward is evidence. I would strongly recommend silence." Wade hit the steering wheel with his palm, a hollow, unsatisfying sound that went nowhere. "This is my town. The chief will back me. The union will back me. I've been here 11 years and I've never drive the car." Damon pressed his thumb once more to the crystal, confirmed the recording, and looked out the scratched window at the manicured lawns of Hargrove rolling past in the gray morning light, and thought about the next case on his phone, and the one after that, and said nothing further for the rest of the ride. The booking area of Hargrove PD smelled of burnt coffee and institutional soap and something papery and slightly stale, the specific atmosphere of a place where paperwork and human disappointment have coexisted for a long time. Fluorescent tubes provided light that was technically adequate and aesthetically dispiriting, and above the desk sergeant's station, a row of monitors fed live images from the lobby, the sally port, and the front entrance. Desk Sergeant Earl Mackey, 60 years old and 29 years on the job, was holding a half-eaten donut when Wade pushed Damon through the door, and he looked up in the automatic manner of a man who has processed 1,000 bookings and knows within the first 3 seconds whether he is about to have a problem. He looked at the suit. He looked at the posture. He looked at the quality of stillness in the man's expression, not the stillness of defeat or fear, not the resigned quiet of someone who has been through this before and has given up, but something categorically different. Something that Earl, after 29 years, recognized the way you recognize a smell from childhood. the complete, unperturbed composure of someone who is entirely in control of himself and of considerably more than that. He set the donut down on the desk with deliberate care and did not pick it up again. "Wade," he said. "What do you got?" "Book him," Wade said tightly, not meeting Earl's eyes. "Disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, impersonating a federal officer." Earl looked at the suit again, the face, the stillness. His instincts sent up a signal that his 30 years of professional experience told him not to ignore, and he was old enough to have learned to listen to that experience. "Wade, book him, Earl." Earl stood up slowly. He gestured toward the row of security monitors on the wall above his station, and the gesture was the kind that says, "Look at this before you say another word." Wade looked. The lobby camera showed the front entrance in real time. District Attorney Patricia Ellison stood at the front reception desk, and her voice was carrying through the audio pickup at a volume that was pressing the young receptionist against the back wall. Beside Patricia stood a man in a pinstriped suit, Attorney Leonard Voss, who had left his downtown office the moment his phone rang and covered 43 miles in 38 minutes already on his own phone, speaking quickly and quietly in the manner of someone who is making calls that matter. Through the lobby's glass front doors, a white news van was pulling to the curb on Maple Street. Then a second one appeared behind it. "Who is this?" Earl asked very quietly, still looking at the monitors. Damon leaned slightly toward the booking counter, the cuffs producing a soft, clear clink as he shifted. "My name," he said as Special Agent Damon Briggs. "I am the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the FBI's Civil Rights Division. I'd like to speak with your chief, and I want Officer Pruitt to remain in this room and begin writing his incident report right now before he makes any phone calls." In the space of 3 seconds, the booking room became very quiet in a way that had nothing to do with noise level and everything to do with the specific weight of understanding settling over a group of people at roughly the same time. And then the terminal screen on Earl's desk changed. Earl had typed the name for booking standard procedure, something he had done thousands of times, and the screen had loaded, and then a narrow amber bar had appeared at the top of the page, and then that bar had turned the flat, unambiguous red of a system-level alert. The text appeared in clean capital letters, unhurried and absolute. "Federal employee restricted record. Do not process without field office authorization. Code red priority." Below it, a second line. "Contact FBI Washington Field Office, Deputy Director's Office." The room went quiet, one person at a time. The clerk stopped typing mid-keystroke. The young officer by the far door looked at the screen and then at Wade, and then back at the screen. Wade leaned forward and read it once and then read it again, his lips moving slightly as if the second reading might produce a different output. Earl took his hand off the mouse slowly, the way you remove your hand from something you have just realized is dangerous. Nobody spoke for 4 full seconds. They were 4 of the longest seconds that Hargrove Police Department's booking area had ever produced. The steel door from the corridor burst open, and Chief Gary Holloway came through it fast, which was not his customary mode of entry. Holloway normally entered rooms the way a man enters rooms, when he has decided that his composure is itself a form of authority, unhurried and deliberate, and slightly theatrical in its calm. Today, he was holding his phone and moving quickly, and whatever conversation he had just concluded had done something significant to the color in his face. He hung up as he came through the door. He looked at Wade. He looked at Damon. He read the booking room with the rapid political intelligence of a man who has been reading difficult rooms for 20 years and knows within 5 seconds whether he is looking at a problem he can manage or one that has already managed him. "Take those cuffs off him," he said low, each word its own separate sentence. "Right now." "Chief, he was resisted. The state attorney general is on hold. The governor's office has called twice." A pause. "Take them off." Wade reached for his keys, found them and dropped them, a sharp metallic clatter on the linoleum that rang out in the silent room and slid 3 feet across the polished floor, coming to rest directly beside Damon's left shoe. Damon looked down at the keys. He looked back up at Wade. He did not move his foot. Wade bent down and retrieved them with hands that were visibly undeniably unsteady. The cuffs came off. Damon pressed his thumb to the crystal of the Longine's weems for exactly 2 seconds, felt the confirmation, and rolled his wrists once slowly. Then he looked at Chief Gary Holloway with the patient, unhurried attention of a man who has already done all the deciding that needs doing. "I'll need those cuffs bagged as evidence," he said, tagged with the time and Officer Pruitt's badge number. A pause, perfectly calibrated. "Then I want the full booking process completed on record on camera. And I want Officer Pruitt in the squad room writing his incident report right now before his union representative answers his phone." He looked at Holloway. "After you, Chief." Holloway's political smile materialized from 20 years of muscle memory, smooth, practiced, symmetrical, and no longer connected to anything behind it whatsoever. The interrogation room was painted the institutional beige of spaces designed with the specific intention of communicating the total absence of comfort. Cinder block walls, a metal table bolted to the center of the floor. 2 chairs, of which one was slightly lower and angled than the other. A 2-way mirror that everyone in the room understood to be a 2-way mirror, and an overhead camera with a steady red light that blinked with the patient tireless regularity of something that does not get bored and does not look away. Damon sat in the suspect's chair. He chose it deliberately with the same deliberateness he brought to everything, and he crossed one leg over the other and settled his hands in his lap and looked at Chief Gary Holloway with the patient, unhurried attention of a man who has nowhere else to be and no interest in pretending otherwise. Patricia stood in the far corner with her arms crossed, watching Holloway with an expression that was moving at measured intervals between cold fury and something quieter and harder, the beginning of a woman carefully tallying what she had trusted over 3 years of professional alliance and what exactly that trust had been built upon. Agent Briggs Holloway began folding his hands on the table with the practiced ease of a man who has sat across from difficult conversations before and has a repertoire of postures for them. "I want you to know that what happened this morning is in no way representative of this department," Officer Pruitt Damon said pleasantly. 11 years on your force, 16 excessive force complaints in 5 years. 13 of those complaints involved Black or Latino men. 0 sustained findings. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded document, handwritten, dense, precise, and placed it on the table with the gentle care of someone setting down something that has considerable weight. Every single exoneration signed off by Sergeant Roy Barker. Your current head of internal affairs, who was Officer Pruitt's roommate at the police academy and the best man at his wedding in 2010. He let the quiet settle for a moment. My team pulled the full personnel file 18 minutes after I called from the back of that cruiser. We are, as a division, very thorough. Holloway adjusted his posture. Internal affairs is an independent. Internal affairs in this department, Damon said, still entirely conversational, is 1 sergeant and 2 part-time administrators. That sergeant attended the arresting officer's wedding. Another pause. This is no longer about what happened in a coffee shop this morning, Chief. This is about a department that has been operating with a deeply entrenched accountability failure for at least 5 years, and you have signed your name to every outcome that failure has produced. Patricia stepped forward from the wall. The movement was deliberate and quiet and had the weight of a door closing. Gary. The first name carried 3 years of professional association of shared strategy sessions and coordinated task forces, and the kind of implicit trust that makes 2 institutions function as one. It also carried now the specific tone of someone who is putting something down permanently and without ceremony. I am opening a formal use-of-force investigation into this department, effective today. Retroactive to the date of the earliest complaint on Pruitt's file. Holloway turned to her with an expression that was trying to be wounded and not quite succeeding. Patricia, we have always been on the same. We were on the same team, she said. This morning made that position professionally untenable, and I think we both know it. She looked at Damon. I'll make the calls. Holloway put 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. A young officer appeared at the door with the expression of a man who has been dispatched to deliver bad news and has not yet made peace with the assignment. Chief Press is outside, all of them, and the attorney from the lobby is asking to speak with the prisoner. Damon stood. He walked to the 2-way mirror and looked at his own reflection suit, intact face, composed, knowing that someone behind that glass was watching and addressing them as much as Holloway when he spoke. Preserve all body camera footage, all dash cam footage, the complete security archive from Forsyth and Sons going back 24 hours. If a single second of any of it experiences a technical anomaly before it reaches federal evidence servers, I will personally charge you with obstruction of justice. He looked back at Holloway. Do we understand each other? Holloway not looking up. We understand each other. Tell Officer Pruitt to finish his incident report. I want a copy. Damon walked to the door and opened it. I'll be in the lobby. Holloway moved fast once the interrogation room door closed behind him. The speed of a man who has decided that thinking will only slow him down, and that action, any action, is preferable to standing still while the walls continue closing. He pulled Wade from the squad room with 2 fingers and a look that communicated an entire conversation in under a second. Closed his office door behind them. Both drew the blinds on the glass partition and turned off his body camera. Then he turned around and looked at Wade Pruitt, with eyes that had moved well past anger into somewhere colder and considerably more calculated. Tell me everything he said. All of it. Nothing left out. Wade told him. Every detail, every word exchanged in the cafe and in the car and in the booking room, nothing omitted because they were past the point at which omissions could help either of them. When he finished, Holloway was quiet for a long time, standing with his back to his desk and his eyes on the floor running numbers that Wade could not see and arriving at a calculation that Wade could not follow. Then he walked around the desk, sat down, and opened his computer with the administrative credentials that gave him access to every record the department had ever produced, every log, every report, every entry in the computer-aided dispatch system going back 11 years. The lawsuit is already drafted, Holloway said, navigating through the system with the flat, deliberate efficiency of a man who has made a decision and is implementing it before he can reconsider it. Voss was on the phone before you pulled into the lot. That means we need to give the city's defense counsel something to work with, a reason that exists in the record before the stop. Wade watched the screen. What are you doing? Correcting a record, Holloway said, and his voice had the quality of a man talking himself along a ledge while carefully not looking down at what is on either side of it. He opened a new log entry in the dispatch system. Call type suspicious person man with a gun. Location Forsyth and Sons, 224 Maple Street. Caller anonymous. Notes. Male black wearing suit. Patron reports firearm visible in waistband, concern for patron safety. He set the timestamp to 7:58 a.m. and hit enter, and the entry slotted into the morning's dispatch timeline between 2 real calls on either side, formatted identically indistinguishable from everything surrounding it, a perfect imitation of something that had never happened. Wade stared at the screen. The relief that moved through him was physical and specific. He felt it in his shoulders first, then in his jaw. Places where tension had been living since the moment the badge wallet hit the table. Unwinding now in a long, slow release that felt dangerously like safety. It looks real, he said. It is real now, Holloway said. He leaned back and exhaled a long, considered breath with no relief in it that he was sharing. When Voss subpoenas the logs, this is what he gets. A dispatch call matching the description placed before your stop. He cannot win a civil rights case against an officer who responded to a report of an armed individual in a public space. He settles for something manageable. The department issues a statement about improved training protocols. We move on. He looked at Wade directly for the first time since they had entered the office. We survived this. What neither of them knew, what they could not have known, could not have reasoned their way toward even if they had tried. was that the Longines Weems watch was sitting in a clear plastic evidence bag on Earl Mackey's booking desk, 3 feet from the glass partition that separated the desk sergeant's station from the corridor outside Holloway's office. The partition was standard interior glass 3/8 of an inch thick, the kind installed in every municipal building constructed in the county between 1990 and 2010. The watch's microphone array had been calibrated in a Quantico testing facility to capture clear, usable audio through precisely this grade of material at distances up to 18 feet. It had been recording since the moment Damon activated it in the parking lot before he walked to the cafe that morning. It was recording Holloway's voice right now, every word crystal clear, preserved on an encrypted chip that neither Gary Holloway nor Wade Pruitt knew existed, protected behind a security protocol that neither of their names would ever appear in saving automatically to a federal server in a building 400 miles away. Holloway straightened his shirt, walked out to the booking desk with his political smile rebuilt and operational, retrieved the evidence bag without ceremony and carried it to the lobby. "Agent Briggs, your personal effects." He extended the bag. "And again the department's sincerest apologies. Officer Pruitt acted on incomplete information from a dispatch communication that appears to have been a procedural breakdown, one of those systemic, one of those deeply embedded failures that no department is entirely immune to. We are committed to a full internal review." Damon took the bag. He opened it slowly, removed the Longines Weems, turned it over once in his hands with the careful attention of someone examining a thing they value, and strapped it onto his left wrist. He pressed his thumb to the crystal face for 2 seconds. The confirmation vibration was faint and specific, and told him everything he needed to know about the last 11 minutes. He looked at Gary Holloway. He looked at the door to the squad room. He did the arithmetic with the quiet, unhurried precision that had been the primary working instrument of his career for 23 years. "A breakdown in the system," he repeated. His voice was entirely pleasant. "That's what we're calling it." He looked across the lobby at Leonard Voss, who had finally made it through the front desk, and gave him a single look, the shorthand of people who have worked in the same world long enough to communicate whole paragraphs without speaking. One clear instruction delivered without words. Not yet. The story ran hard for the first 10 days, local television first, then the regional papers, then a segment on a national cable network that obtained the Forsyth and Sons security footage, and played the moment Wade tossed the badge wallet onto the coffee-soaked table on an 8-second loop approximately 34 times in a single broadcast, accompanied by the audio of Wade saying "nice toy" in a voice that carried considerably more confidence than it had any right to. The phrase became a caption and a hashtag and a national shorthand within 48 hours, attached to a photograph of a gold FBI shield resting on a white tablecloth darkened by spreading coffee, an image that was reproducible and simple and told a story that required no accompanying explanation. Yolanda's footage, 38 seconds of it, showed everything that Wade's body camera, which he had adjusted twice during the confrontation both times, angling it away from his own actions, had been careful not to capture. It showed Damon's complete and consistent calm. It showed his repeated patient attempts to communicate his situation. It showed Wade's escalating aggression against a man who was at every moment doing exactly what was asked of him. And it showed in the final seconds before Wade pushed Damon through the door, the coffee still dripping from the edge of the table, quiet, unhurried, unstoppable, which became the detail that stayed the image that people returned to a spilled coffee that had cost a suburb its good name. Wade's police union issued a statement on day 4. Officer Pruitt's actions were a reasonable response to an anonymous tip regarding an armed individual, consistent with department protocol and with the officer's 11 years of exemplary service. Chief Holloway gave one television interview to an anchor he had known for 9 years, in which he called the incident a breakdown in communication, and said, "We take this very seriously," 4 separate times without being challenged on any of them. The defense held on the surface for a while, Social media split the way it always splits, one side demanding accountability, the other constructing an alternate narrative in which Damon had manufactured the confrontation for professional or political purposes. But the alternate narrative had a short life because Yolanda's footage did not leave room for it. You cannot watch 38 seconds of a man being shoved against a window and a badge wallet thrown onto a table and arrive at a story in which the man with the badge did something wrong. Wade drove past Forsyth and Sons every morning of the second week. On day 4, he stopped looking at the window. On day 7, he stopped checking the news. His union's lawyers had told him with the calm confidence of people who resolve these situations regularly that the fabricated log entry was airtight, indistinguishable from the real entries surrounding it, properly formatted, filed under credentials that authorized its creation, and he had begun in the slow, incremental way of a man who very much wants to believe something to believe them. He wrote 2 parking tickets on a Thursday afternoon, laughed at something a younger officer said in the break room, watched football that evening, and went to bed. Gary Holloway attended a county business dinner on the Friday of the 3rd week, shook hands with 3 city council members, ordered the salmon, and was on his 2nd glass of wine when his phone vibrated with a calendar notification. Deposition, Briggs versus City of Hargrove. Tuesday, 9 a.m. Voss and Associates, 39th floor. He read it, set the phone face down on the white tablecloth beside his dinner plate, and picked up his wine glass. The log is in discovery, he thought. Voss has already seen it. This is paperwork now. He finished the salmon. He ordered dessert. He slept that night without difficulty. What the world did not see, what the cameras and the cable segments and the viral footage did not capture, was Patricia Ellison, who had resigned as district attorney 12 days after the arrest, in a letter to the county executive that cited an irreconcilable breach of institutional trust and offered no further elaboration. She had not spoken publicly since. She had been building quietly and with considerable thoroughness a private civil rights practice, and she had submitted a formal records request for the complete unredacted personnel file of every officer in Hargrove PD who had signed their name beneath a Wade Pruitt incident report during the past 11 years. The file, when it arrived, was thick. She had begun reading it on the same day the news vans found other things to cover, and she had not stopped. The conference room at Voss and Associates occupied the 39th floor of a glass tower in the city, and on a clear November morning it offered an unobstructed view of the lake extending to the horizon. Water and sky merging at the edge of visibility into a single gray-blue line that seemed to go on longer than anything should reasonably go on. It was a room designed with considerable intentionality. The mahogany table, the leather chairs, the view to make the people sitting on the wrong side of it feel in the most precise and physical way possible the full weight of what was happening to them. Wade Pruitt and Gary Holloway sat on the wrong side. Between them was Nolan Graves, the city attorney, 55, a man who had spent his entire career successfully managing problems that were at their core containable, and who had been handed for the first time in his professional life something that was not. He had a legal pad, a pen he was clicking and unclicking in a rhythm that communicated his internal state with the accuracy of a medical instrument and the faint, persistent smell of antacids. Across the 12-foot table, Damon Briggs and Leonard Voss. At the table's head, a court reporter with her fingers resting above her keys. In the far corner, a video camera whose red light blinked with the patient, tireless steadiness of something that does not get distracted and does not look away. Leonard Voss spent 20 minutes on background training histories, commendations, disciplinary records, building something at an unhurried pace whose purpose and destination were not yet visible. Wade answered smoothly, with the well-rehearsed confidence of a man who has spent 3 weeks reconstructing a story until it no longer feels like a story. On the morning of October 14th, he had entered Forsyth and Sons in response to a dispatch call report of an armed individual anonymous tip came across his terminal. He had done so in accordance with department protocol and with his 11 years of experience on the force. And you are absolutely certain, Voss said, leaning forward with both hands flat on the table, that this call existed before you entered that cafe? That you are not under oath on the record with a court reporter and a camera present describing a call that was created after the fact to justify a stop that was made on no legal basis whatsoever? Wade's jaw was steady. His eyes were steady. 4 weeks had worked the lie so deeply into his understanding of events that it no longer felt entirely like a lie. Absolutely certain. I followed protocol. I received a call. I responded to it. Voss turned to Holloway. Chief Holloway, you submitted the department's dispatch logs as part of discovery. Can you confirm for the record that those logs accurately reflect every call received by your department on the morning of October 14th, and that no entries were created, modified, or backdated at any point after the fact? Holloway adjusted his tie. He had rehearsed this answer until it had the texture of something real. I can confirm that. I personally reviewed and submitted those logs. The call in question is present in the record, and it predates Officer Pruitt's stop. Nolan Graves stopped clicking his pen. The silence that followed lasted 2 seconds and had a density to it, a physical quality like the stillness of air before a significant change in weather. And Graves felt it the way you feel a change in pressure in the chest and in the ears simultaneously. He could not yet identify its source. His pen hand stayed still. Voss reached into his briefcase. The motion was unhurried, deliberate, the motion of a man who has been waiting for a specific moment and has now arrived at it. He removed a USB drive and a bound document, 40 pages color-tabbed, and placed both on the table with the quiet care of someone setting down something that has considerable weight. I have here, he said, a forensic digital analysis of the Hargrove Police Department's computer-aided dispatch server conducted under federal subpoena by a team of 3 certified forensic analysts. He paused for one breath. The analysis identifies a log entry created at 11:52 in the morning on October 14th, using Chief Holloway's administrative credentials with a timestamp that was manually adjusted to 7:58 a.m. He let that settle for 3 full seconds without filling them. But more relevantly than any of that, I have this. He plugged the USB drive into the laptop in front of him and turned the volume up, and Gary Holloway's voice filled the conference room, clear and complete and utterly without distortion, the voice of a man speaking in what he believed to be the privacy of his own office on an ordinary Tuesday morning. We just need a call logged before the stop. Probable cause, call type suspicious person man with a gun. Then Wade, in a voice that had lost all of its Tuesday morning confidence. It looks real. Then Holloway again, with the flat, decisive certainty of a man stepping over a line and choosing not to look back at it. It is real now. When that lawyer subpoenas the logs, this is what he gets. He can't win a civil rights case against an officer responding to an armed person complaint. He settles for nuisance money. We survived this. The room did not breathe. The court reporter's fingers had stopped above her keys. She was looking at the surface of the table. Nolan Graves had pushed his legal pad away from himself, a small, involuntary gesture of disassociation, as if putting distance between himself and the object might put distance between himself and what it represented, and he was staring at the tabletop with the expression of a man who has just watched the ground he was standing on reclassify itself as something entirely different. Wade was holding the edge of the mahogany table with both hands, and the color had left his face so completely and so rapidly that the skin along his jaw had taken on a grayish cast, under the conference room lighting the specific color of a man who has, in the space of 90 seconds, understood something about the architecture of his situation that he cannot undo or revise. Holloway was staring at the laptop screen with his mouth fractionally open, the expression of a man watching something he had trusted completely. The one thing he had trusted completely collapse without warning and without sound. Damon had not moved throughout any of it. He had held the same posture from the moment he sat down, back straight, hands in his lap, face quiet and entirely attentive, and he was looking at Holloway with the specific patient attention of a man who has waited 3 weeks for this precise moment, and who knew from the beginning exactly what it would look like when it finally arrived. Graves pushed his chair back from the table. I need to call the mayor. I need to request a recess. No, Damon said. He stood up and walked around the end of the conference table, not quickly, not with any theater or performance of drama, but with the same unhurried certainty with which he had moved through every significant room of his professional life. He stopped near the center of the room and looked at the two men who had put him in handcuffs 6 weeks ago in a coffee shop on Maple Street. The conference room door opened. 4 FBI agents walked in suits rather than tactical gear, but the handcuffs on their belts were visible and their faces were not performing anything at all. The lead agent placed a printed warrant in the center of the table. Gary Holloway, Wade Pruitt, you are under arrest for conspiracy to deprive civil rights under Title 18, obstruction of federal justice and perjury before a federal court reporter. Wade shot to his feet so fast his chair struck the credenza behind him with a hollow crack. Qualified immunity you can't. That doesn't apply to Damon. Stepped toward him. He stopped 3 feet away and looked at the man who had thrown his badge wallet onto a coffee-soaked table and told him with complete confidence that there was nothing he could do about any of it in this town. Qualified immunity, Damon said, his voice entirely quiet, protects officers from civil liability for good faith errors in judgment. It has never protected anyone, not once in the entire history of its application, from federal criminal prosecution for felonies that are recorded, documented, and proven beyond any reasonable doubt. He held Wade's eyes without looking away. You wanted to make an arrest on October 14th, Officer Pruitt. A pause. You made one. Today, so do we. The agents moved in. Wade was handcuffed at the conference table on camera, the court reporter's fingers moving again across her keys with the patient professionalism of someone whose job is to capture exactly what happens in rooms like this one. Holloway was cuffed without resistance. He had arrived somewhere in the preceding 60 seconds at a place beyond resistance into a stunned and inert stillness that resembled dignity at a distance, but was, in truth, the complete absence of any remaining alternative. The United States District Courthouse was packed to capacity for the sentencing of Wade Pruitt and Gary Holloway. The press gallery full in numbers Damon had not seen at a local proceeding since a political corruption case he had testified at years earlier in another city. The public gallery standing at the back shoulder to shoulder filled with residents of Hargrove and Caldwell County who had spent 6 weeks watching their suburb's name become in the national shorthand. A word for something they would have sworn before October 14th was not possible here, not in this town, not among people like them. The change in the two men at the defense table was stark enough that it constituted its own kind of testimony, visible before a word was spoken or a paper read into the record. Wade had lost 19 pounds in pre-trial detention. His civilian suit, the best one he owned, the one Donna had pressed before she found out about the credit card, and before she filed the paperwork, was too large at the shoulders and hung off him in a way that was difficult to look at directly. He sat with his hands folded on the table, and they were not steady, and he had aged in a way that had nothing to do with the passage of time and everything to do with the sustained removal of the thing that had structured his understanding of himself for 11 years. The badge, the uniform, the brotherhood, the daily reinforcement of a particular kind of authority. Without those things, he looked like what he had always been underneath them. A man who had peaked at 18 and spent 25 years refusing to examine that fact, and who was now at 43 examining it in federal court under fluorescent lighting with nowhere left to look away. Gary Holloway had faded in the way a photograph fades when left too long in the wrong kind of light. Not dramatically, not all at once, but comprehensively and without recovery. The permatan was gone. The silver hair looked simply gray. He sat without moving, and it was not the stillness of composure Damon knew. The stillness of composure had cultivated it for decades. It was the stillness of a man who has gone through every remaining option and found that none of them lead anywhere he can go. In the gallery's third row, Patricia Ellison sat alone in a dark jacket watching the defense table with the focused, unreadable attention of someone who is finishing something that has taken a considerable time to finish properly. In the front row, Damon sat with a manila folder open in his lap, reading the next case. And he was thinking about Jalen the Civic, the 3 mornings a week, the suburbs that look exactly like this one, the conversation they had had the night Jalen got his license, Jalen's voice saying, "I know, Dad," in the tone of a young man who had already understood the world and was only being told about it officially, which was the hardest version of being told. He held that thought for the length of one breath. Then he closed it away and turned the page in the folder, because there was work to do, and because the work was the point, and because Jalen deserved a world in which the work got done. The Honorable Sandra Pruitt, no relation to anyone in this courtroom, a fact noted in the pre-trial filings, and unremarkable to her, entered without ceremony, and the courtroom rose and settled in a single wave. She was 61 years old, 18 years on the federal bench. Her reputation built across 2 decades, on one consistent principle. The degree of trust extended to a public official is the precise measure of the crime committed when that trust is deliberately broken. She adjusted her glasses. She looked at her papers. Then she looked at the 2 men at the defense table, and when she spoke, her voice reached the back row without amplification. "Wade Pruitt." She did not look away from him. "You were issued a badge, a uniform, and the sworn authority of the state of Illinois and the United States Constitution. On the morning of October 14th, you chose to use that authority as an instrument of personal prejudice, targeted at a man who had done nothing more threatening than order a coffee and wait for a colleague." Wade looked at the table. A muscle moved in his jaw. "You did not stop Special Agent Briggs because he had done anything wrong," she continued, and her voice had not raised. If anything, it had dropped, which was more effective than any volume. "You stopped him because the combination of his race and his presence in a neighborhood you had appointed yourself to gatekeep offended a conviction you have apparently carried for your entire adult life. I want to be precise about something." A pause, deliberate, and waited. "You did not make a mistake in that coffee shop. A mistake implies a departure from one's values. What 16 complaints and 11 years of documented conduct demonstrate is that you acted entirely in accordance with your values. The mistake was the institutions for allowing those values to carry a badge for 11 years without consequence." In the rear of the gallery, a woman made a sound, not a word, not a cry, but a brief involuntary release of something that had been held very carefully for a very long time. The physical expression of astonishment that something like this was actually finally genuinely possible. "For the deprivation of civil rights under color of law," Judge Pruitt said, "and for conspiracy to obstruct federal justice, 132 months in federal custody. No possibility of early release." Wade closed his eyes. Behind them, in the quiet of a courtroom that had gone completely still, he was doing arithmetic. His daughter was 12, his son was 9. His wife had filed for divorce 14 days after his arrest and had not attended the sentencing and would not. 132 months. His daughter would be 23 when he was released if everything went exactly as federal sentencing guidelines prescribed. His son would be 20. He would not know them the way a father knows his children. They would not know him the way children know their father. The arithmetic went on, and arrived nowhere he could survive, and he knew it, and he kept his eyes closed for a long time. "Gary Holloway." Judge Pruitt turned. "You occupied a position of greater responsibility and greater accountability than the man beside you. You were not blind to who Officer Pruitt was. 16 complaints, 16 exonerations, your signature on every one. You were his shield. You were the institutional wall that made what he did not only possible, but predictable." Her voice remained even precise, surgical. "And when the consequences of his conduct threatened to reach you, your response was to conspire to falsify federal records to instruct your subordinate in the commission of additional felonies and to lie about all of it under oath in a federal deposition on camera in front of a court reporter who was capturing every word." She paused. The silence was deliberate. "You did not protect the institution you led. You weaponized it against the man it had already wronged once that morning." A pause that the room seemed to hold its breath inside. For conspiracy, obstruction of federal justice, and perjury, 168 months in federal custody. No parole, Holloway received the sentence without visible reaction. Whatever mechanism he had used to manage his public face across 20 years of politics and community dinners and difficult press conferences was still operating barely on the last of what it had left. As the marshals brought Wade to his feet and turned him toward the side exit, he looked toward the front row, not at his attorney, not at the gallery, but at Damon Briggs, who was sitting with the manila folder open in his lap, reading the next thing already on to what came after this. Wade looked at him. The aggression was gone. The territorial certainty that had walked him into a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning and convinced him that a man in a suit was something that needed accounting for, that was gone. What was left in its place was something simpler and far worse. A hollow, exhausted bewilderment. The expression of a man who had genuinely not believed at any point in the preceding 6 weeks that this particular outcome was possible for someone like him. That the thing he had spent his career standing behind could not in the end stand for him. He opened his mouth. Perhaps to say he was sorry. Perhaps to say something else entirely. Something that didn't have a name yet. The marshal's hand closed on his arm. "Move it, inmate." The word landed in the courtroom exactly the way it was designed to land a reclassification complete, final, and without appeal. The man who had spent 11 years deciding who belonged where had just been told permanently and by a federal institution exactly where he belonged now. Damon did not watch him go. He turned the page in the folder. There was work to do. In the third row, Patricia Ellison watched Holloway being led out through the side door. When the door closed, she reached into her briefcase and removed a folder, the personnel file she had been building for 3 weeks, the full unredacted record of every Hargrove officer who had signed beneath a Wade Pruitt incident report across 11 years. She opened it to the first page and began to read. The Hargrove City Council met in emergency session the following month under bright lights and the attention of every property owner in the county, because the mathematics of what Gary Holloway had done had produced consequences that no budget meeting had ever been designed to absorb. His conspiracy had been documented and proven as deliberate rather than negligent, and the city's liability insurer had invoked its willful misconduct exclusion with the calm efficiency of a clause that exists precisely for moments like this one. The insurer would not cover the settlement. The city would. $5.1 million coming directly from the general fund, and the mayor read the line items from a prepared statement with the grim, careful precision of a man who has delivered bad news before, but never news quite this specific, this local, or this preventable. The Youth Recreation Center on Birchwood Avenue canceled. Public library hours reduced by 40% for a minimum of 3 years. Property taxes raised 3.5% annually for 5 consecutive years. The people who had driven past the same patrol car on Maple Street every morning for 11 years, who had waved at the officer inside it at the 4th of July block party, and never once asked what it was doing in that particular spot, or why it kept producing the same kinds of complaints. Those people felt it now in the register that changes minds in a place like Hargrove, the only register that was always going to work, the one measured in dollars 4 times a year. On a bill with their name on it. Damon filed the settlement paperwork on the same Thursday the mayor made his announcement. The entire $5.1 million was transferred to the endowment of a newly established nonprofit organization, the Hargrove Civil Rights Legal Defense Center, headquartered on Maple Street in a Victorian storefront 2 doors from Forsyth and Sons that had been standing empty for 2 years, its front windows papered over waiting for something to occupy it. 6 full-time civil rights attorneys, a forensic review team, annual independent audits of every use of force incident in Caldwell County. The endowment was structured to generate operating income from interest in perpetuity. It would not need fundraising drives or political goodwill or the sustained attention of a news cycle. It would simply be there every year for as long as anyone needed it, which Damon calculated would be a long time. Above the entrance, mounted in large bronze letters bolted directly to the stone facade above the door, the Pruitt Holloway Center for Civil Rights and Equal Justice. He had not named it after them as cruelty, though he understood with precision exactly how it would feel to drive past those letters every morning on the way to work. He had named it after them as architecture permanent, public, and unavoidable, a monument built entirely from their own money, bearing their own names, serving the exact people they had tried to harm, standing on the street where it all began. Every officer in the Hargrove Police Department would drive past it on the way to the station. Every new recruit would learn those names in their first week and understand from the beginning what those names meant and how they got there. On the morning the center opened its doors, Damon stopped at Forsyth & Sons. He ordered a black coffee, dark roast, and a blueberry scone, carried them to the window table, crossed his legs, and took the first sip. Outside on Maple Street, Yolanda, who had called the FBI's tip line the afternoon of the arrest, submitted the full cafe security footage before anyone thought to ask for it, and quietly begun night classes in paralegal studies. The following January was unlocking the front door of the Center 2 storefronts, down a set of keys in one hand and a stack of intake forms under her arm. She looked up, saw him through the glass, and gave him a nod. Small, serious, carrying the weight of everything she had seen on an ordinary October Tuesday and chosen to do something about. Nobody in the cafe stared. The room had learned something quietly, the way rooms learn things, not through announcement or ceremony, but through the slow reshaping of what they expect to see when someone walks through the door. On Maple Street, a woman stopped in front of the bronze letters above the center's entrance. She read the names, read them again. Then she walked inside and asked for an intake form because her nephew had been stopped 3 times last year in a suburb that looked exactly like this one, and now, for the first time, there was somewhere to go. Damon finished his coffee, left the scone half-eaten the way he always did, picked up his phone and checked the next case. The coffee was excellent. The work continued. If this story moved you, if you held your breath when that recording played or felt something shift when you saw those bronze letters on the building, subscribe to our channel. We have more stories of real accountability, hard-earned justice, and the people who refuse to look away. You don't want to miss what's coming next.